Hello and welcome to Reporters on France 24. I'm Delano de Souza. In this edition, we head to Canada, a country known around the world for its high quality of life. But what is less known is the reality of the country's Indigenous population. They live a markedly different existence, filled with poverty, unemployment, and alarmingly high suicide rates. Their living conditions have worsened over the past decade, this despite criticism from the United Nations. The country's Indigenous people are paying a high price for past policies of colonialism. Last year, Canada's Supreme Court described it as, quote, cultural genocide. The Indigenous people, however, aren't taking things lying down. They've begun banding together to catch the attention of those in power. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has called for a genuine nation-to-nation process to improve the relationship. But the Indigenous people say they want action and not just words. With or without the government's backing, they say the time has come for change. Frédéric Guiraud reports.
For Kimberly, it's a matter of honor.
I can remember since I took Native history in school, we've been hated on Indigenous people for a long time.
Each day that the weather in Winnipeg permits, she paces along the banks of the Red River in search of the slightest clue.
Okay, no, that wasn't blood. Yeah?
Can you explain to me what you are doing?
I am looking for anything that has to do with missing and murdered Indigenous women. I'm looking for blood, bloody clothing, wrist ties, mouth ties, duct tape, just anything that gives me a sign of what I could be looking for. Yeah.
According to the latest Canadian statistics, nearly 4,000 Indigenous women have disappeared or been murdered without the police solving the crimes in the past 30 years. In 2014, 15-year-old Tina Fontaine was found in a bag at the bottom of a river in Winnipeg. It was one murder too many for the families of the victims. Since then, relatives and volunteers take turns each summer to search the river, convinced that its depths contain other secrets.
Yeah, but you just never know what's in here.
Kimberly lost her 16-year-old daughter, killed by gunshot on her way to a party. After the death of Tina Fontaine, she vowed to help solve these crimes.
It looks like a police job.
It is a police job. They don't have the time to come out here and do what we do.
So
The only time, pretty much, the Winnipeg police come out here and help us is if we find something. We find limbs or body parts or skulls, scalp, hair, then they'll come. Until then, this is all up to us to do this.
With a population made up of 12% of Indigenous people, Winnipeg is the most Indigenous of large Canadian cities. It's also one of the most violent in the country. A stone's throw from the city centre is the rundown North End district. Here, scores of homeless people wander around night and day, a reflection of the tense economic and social climate. Trafficking and crime exploded as a direct consequence. An unbearable situation for many of the families of this neighbourhood. But here too, the death of the young Tina Fontaine caused shockwaves in the community. Since then, residents have created volunteer patrols known as the Bear Clan.
There's a vehicle interacting with two girls over there by Selkirk. Just get close enough to see the plate.
5 nights a week, members help people in distress, look out for suspicious behaviour and notify the police if necessary. The instigator of these patrols is him, James FAVELAN.
I'm one of the people that feel like it's okay to come and visit, you know, not to be scared. There's been a lot of, for forever, the North End has been viewed as a scary place. It's like that's beyond the tracks. You don't go there, right? Hello there. Playing in the mud?
A clear sign that the community is pulling together. In 2 years, the number of people patrolling has gone from a handful to nearly 400 members, a small revolution.
There's used to be a lot of crime activity on my street, and now that when they come and patrol, there's been a lot less of that stuff that's been happening.
So it's pretty positive.
Yes, it has been very positive.
The initiative has prompted the formation of 18 patrols in other Canadian cities, a success that highlights the authorities' failures.
It's time for a change in this country, my friends, a real change.
Until now, the Indigenous peoples seem to have been left to fend for themselves against rising adversity. But they may have finally found a strong ally in Justin Trudeau. Immediately after his election, the young Prime Minister appointed an Indigenous Minister of Justice, announced €6 billion in investments in Indigenous communities, and made an official apology in front of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
The Government of Canada sincerely apologizes and asks the forgiveness of the Aboriginal peoples of this country for failing them so profoundly.
Weighty words in front of a commission that took 6 years to shine a light on a shady period of Canadian history, Indigenous residential schools. In the reservations, it's often said that the residential schools are the source of all their woes. During colonisation, 150,000 children were locked up in these religious establishments, officially to study, but in reality, as the infamous saying goes, to kill the Indian in each of them. It's thought 6,000 children may have died in the schools, the last of which closed in 1996. Many were sexually abused, others were used as subjects in scientific experiments. In 2016, the Supreme Court described it as a cultural genocide. Like many others, the MCKAY family story is closely tied to the residential schools.
My relatives are here, my mom is here, my auntie, my uncle, and their friend.
Paul followed the same path. He was 8 when he was locked up.
I was in Cross-Lake for 2 years, and I was able to hear my family, my granny, my mum, my siblings playing across the river, but I couldn't go to them.
At the end of his studies 10 years later, Paul turned to alcohol and succumbed to deep depression. He'll spend his life trying to recover.
By going back to our culture, I didn't know who I was, what to do, and I just about did what some of our young people are going through.
As you arrive in Cross Lake on Pimicikamak territory, you can't miss the ubiquitous portraits of the missing. But the 8,000 people on the reservation have other worries too. Last year, 5 teenagers and a young mother committed suicide in the same week. The shocked community declared a state of emergency. The suicide rate for Indigenous adolescents is 6 times higher than for the rest of the Canadian population. Amber Muskego wrote a letter read out in the Canadian Parliament in which she blamed the lack of responsibility of the authorities for a generation that's gone adrift. More than 100 of the 1,600 students at this school are being monitored because of suicidal tendencies.
Other people just try to numb the pain by drinking, cutting themselves, doing drugs. That's not how you get rid of anything like that. You have to talk to someone. You have to be able to let it out, really. Because if you don't, it can get so bad to the point where you do commit suicide.
Are you okay?
Yeah, it's just suicide's a really touchy topic right now.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
I lost 2 best friends to suicide. And it's hard.
17-year-old Amber owes her salvation to her father, Horton.
Yeah, I'll take it to our treatment.
As someone who had also attempted suicide when he was young, he found the right words for his daughter when she tried to kill herself several times.
Well, a lot of our children are, they have very low self-esteem because their parents, some of them don't work, and it's not a choice that they don't work, it's just that there is no work. There's only a handful of jobs in our community.
More than 80% of the community here is unemployed. Compare that to the national average of around 7%. Yet 40 years ago, when the community agreed to the construction of a dam on its territory, it hoped the project would solve its problems of acute poverty and unemployment. It was meant to be the flip side of the Manitoba Agreement to build the dam for the province's energy production, which has since made billions in profit. When it was put in service in 1979, Roy Muskegon and Darryl Satie were children. neither trapper realised the impact flooding 65 square kilometres of their territory would have on their lives.
Look at the shoreline right there. The water was so high, and then it went down, and then that land just started coming down, and the trees started coming down.
Since then, there have been more floods, and the constant fluctuation of the water level due to the dam threatens the fragile environmental balance.
This bay, this is where we get sturgeon and feed our families. Now there's nothing here. We set our nets here, there's nothing, just shallow water here.
In late 2014, the furious residents of the reservation evicted the employees from the site. After a 6-week occupation, the standoff came to an end with an official apology and the assurance of a new partnership with the company. But after 2 years of consultations, their main demand, a better share of revenue, has been rejected. Since then, Darosity has trouble imagining a reconciliation with Canada.
They stab you in the back and say, let's have a new relationship. And they do the same thing again. Let's have a new relationship. They keep building dams, but they're going all out. They spend billions, and we are so unemployed. The water used to be up here. Now there's no water, just rocks.
But the people on the reservation still want to believe, and today they're celebrating. Despite the tragic wave of suicides and the chronically under-financed education system, 55 students have graduated. After years of negotiating with the federal government, the reservation chief has an important announcement.
The future, and we will stand. We are working hard to build a new hospital here in Cross Lake. A commitment was made by the government to build a $40 million facility. We need you to be involved. If you want to be a doctor or a nurse, please know we are making a place for you to come back to when you're finished your schooling.
With the highest population growth in the country, the Indigenous youth are a challenge for the government and the hope of an entire community.
Let me check. What is
This afternoon, students from another reservation have come to support an iconic figure from Winnipeg.
I'm looking for the bags, the spoons, and the napkins.
In 2011, floods forced ALTHEA GUIBOCHE to leave her rural area for the city. She lost her house and spent 8 weeks living in the street with her 5 children. Since getting back on her feet, every Sunday she feeds the people she came across at the time.
One rice?
And last year, she surprised them by running for local election as a Liberal, encouraged by Justin Trudeau's first months in office.
And that one's something about empowerment. In my opinion, I think he's done a lot more than any other politician in this century. You know what I mean? And we need more guys, more people like that care about everybody and care that like we're the first people. Why are we suffering? You know? Yes. Good to see you.
Justin Trudeau's support within the Indigenous community is wearing thin. Yet, all are certain that a new era is in the making.
Bye, ALTHEA! Bye, guys! Keep helping!
I'm pleased to be joined by Frédéric Guiraud in the studio. Now, you filmed this report between the summer and autumn of 2016. Where is Canada today in regards to its Indigenous population under the government of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau?
It's a complex question because a number of important issues overlap, whether it's access to education, healthcare or conditions on the reservations. What we have to acknowledge about Justin Trudeau is that he was able to introduce this debate into the political agenda. Despite this, for many Indigenous people, things aren't moving. For example, take the problem of suicides. Last year, when there was a wave of suicides in several communities, money was freed up, resources were made available, but it was mainly for crisis management and not necessarily for long-term solutions. Now, 1 year later, we still have this problem of suicides plaguing several communities. Recently, 2 12-year-old girls killed themselves, and the chief of the reservation complained, saying despite the alarm he sounded last year, He wasn't allocated any resources to handle the problem.
Now, speaking about money, on the economic front, Justin Trudeau has promised to invest 6 billion euros over the next 5 years to improve living conditions of the Indigenous communities. It's a huge amount of money. Where are we at in reaching this amount?
It's not just that it's a large sum, it's that it's unprecedented. No government had ever decided to invest so much money on a single mandate. Last November, Indigenous Affairs Minister Carolyn Bennett welcomed the fact that 90% of the amount budgeted for 2016, about 600 million euros, was already being allocated to different projects. Now what we need to understand is that we're talking about allocated sums and not projects that are already up and running. Take, for example, an issue as essential as access to clean drinking water. In Canada, around 150 communities don't have access to safe drinking water. The money that's been allocated will help, but it will take time. Some people are still waiting, and they haven't yet felt the immediate impact on their lives.
Now, Justin Trudeau has promised a new nation-to-nation relationship between the Indigenous people and Canada. What does this exactly mean in today's setting?
This is another big issue and a big debate. You have to understand that this means tackling certain laws dating back to colonial times. Last year at the UN, for the first time in history and without restrictions, Canada signed on to the Indigenous Peoples' Bill of Rights. It's a huge first, very symbolic, and credit again must be given to Justin Trudeau. But the bill is non-binding. This means it won't change Canadian legislation. So it sends a sort of mixed message. In February, Justin Trudeau appointed 6 ministers to study Indigenous laws that need to be amended. But at the same time, if the Bill of Rights was applied, it would mean that all decisions affecting the Indigenous population must first be approved by that community. Take, for example, the question of natural resources. Recently, Trudeau approved 2 pipeline projects, a gas project and seismic testing in the Arctic for oil and gas exploration. All of these projects are on lands or cross lands that belong to Indigenous communities, and they're opposed to these projects.
Frederic, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. That's it for this edition of Reporters. Until next time, thank you very much for watching.